The song drifted softly through the hospital hallway like a memory that had somehow learned how to breathe again. For a moment, Ryland Mercer froze in place, his hand tightened around the paper coffee cup he carried. The morning sunlight streamed through the large hospital windows, painting golden rectangles across the polished floor. Nurses moved between rooms. Machines beeped in distant corridors. Everything seemed normal, except for that song. The melody floated from his mother's room, and it was impossible. Before we continue, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Hub if you believe kindness, hope, and second chances can change lives. Stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, light can find its way back to us. Ryland stood motionless. The tune wasn't famous. It had never been recorded. It had never been published. In fact, only 3 people in the world had ever heard it: him, his mother, and his brother, Callum, the brother who had died 11 years ago. His pulse raced as he slowly approached the doorway. Every note felt like a hand reaching through time. The melody carried the same gentle rise and fall he remembered from countless evenings in their childhood home. Callum had written the song when he was 17. Back then, their mother had worked 2 jobs while raising them alone. Money was always tight. Some nights the refrigerator held almost nothing. Yet somehow she always managed to smile. One rainy evening, Callum sat at an old keyboard and spent hours composing a melody he called "Morning Will Come." He said it was for their mother, that he wanted to give her something that would remind her that no storm lasted forever. The song had never left their family. Or at least that was what Ryland believed. Now, standing outside room 214, he heard every familiar note flowing from inside. His heart hammered against his chest. Slowly he stepped through the doorway. The room smelled faintly of flowers and antiseptic. His mother, Maribel Mercer, slept peacefully beneath a light blanket. Months of illness had stolen much of her strength. At 74, she seemed smaller than he remembered. Beside her bed sat a young nurse. She couldn't have been older than 20-8. As she adjusted the blanket, she continued singing softly. The melody, that melody. Ryland felt his throat tighten. The nurse noticed him and immediately stopped singing. That a warm but nervous smile crossed her face. That he managed a greeting, but his mind remained fixed on one question. How did she know that song? The nurse introduced herself as Alara Quinn. She had been caring for Maribel during the day shift for several weeks. Ryland thanked her for helping his mother, but eventually he asked about the music. For a brief second, surprise flashed across Alara's face. Then she explained that the song came from an old notebook her grandfather had given her years ago. According to him, it was written by a young musician he once knew. Ryland felt the room spin. His grandfather, a young musician? Nothing about that explanation made sense. Callum had never known any older musicians. He had rarely left their town. He certainly hadn't shared his songs with strangers, yet something in Alara's eyes suggested she was telling the truth. When she left the room, Ryland remained beside his mother, unable to focus on anything else. The mystery followed him throughout the day. That evening, while sorting through old family boxes at home, he found one of Callum's journals. Dust coated the cover. Inside were sketches, lyrics, and unfinished melodies. Then he found it, the original sheet music. Morning Will Come. His brother's handwriting stretched across the page. There was no doubt, the song Alara had sung was exactly the same. The next morning Ryland returned to the hospital earlier than usual. Sunlight filled the corridors. Volunteers arranged flowers near the reception desk. The building felt strangely hopeful. When he found Alara, she was helping an elderly patient walk through a rehabilitation exercise. The kindness in her actions reminded him unexpectedly of Callum. After her shift slowed, they sat together in a quiet family lounge. There, Alara shared the story behind the notebook. Years earlier, her grandfather, Alden Quinn, had run a community arts center in a neighboring county. One summer, a teenage musician had visited during a regional youth program. The young man left behind several pages of music. Among them was a song titled "Morning Will Come." Ryland's breath caught. Callum had attended a summer music workshop shortly before his death. He had almost forgotten that it was the only extended trip his brother ever took. 1,000 forgotten memories suddenly resurfaced. The excitement Callum had shown before leaving, the stories he told afterward, the people he met, the dreams he carried. For years, grief had buried those details beneath heavier memories. Now they emerged again. Elara explained that her grandfather had always treasured the song. He claimed it carried a rare kind of hope. After his passing, she inherited many of his belongings, including the notebook. She learned the melody as a child. Whenever Patience felt lonely or frightened, she sometimes sang it quietly. Neither of them spoke for several moments. The coincidence felt too extraordinary, yet something deeper lingered beneath the surface. Over the following weeks, Ryland visited the hospital daily. His mother's condition remained uncertain. Some days she improved, other days she seemed to slip backward. Fear became his constant companion. Every morning he arrived wondering whether he would receive good news or devastating news. Throughout that difficult season, Elara became an unexpected source of comfort, not through grand speeches, not through promises, simply through kindness. She remembered every patient's favorite blanket, she learned family members' names, she sat with people who had no visitors. She listened, and somehow, amid the exhausting routines of illness and uncertainty, she never stopped caring. Watching her reminded Ryland of something he had lost long ago, hope. After Callum died in a car accident at 19, Ryland had spent years building walls around himself. He buried himself in work. He avoided conversations about grief. He stopped playing music altogether. The piano in his living room had remained untouched for more than a decade. Pain felt safer than vulnerability, distance felt safer than love, but each time Elara sang that melody near his mother's bedside, those walls cracked a little more. One afternoon, Ryland arrived carrying an old folder. Inside were dozens of Callum's compositions, songs no one had heard, dreams no one had seen. He showed them to Elara. Together they spent hours studying the pages. Some pieces were unfinished, others were astonishingly beautiful. As they turned each page, Callum seemed less like a memory and more like a living presence woven into their lives. Meanwhile, Maribel's health slowly improved. The doctors remained cautious, but progress became noticeable. Her appetite returned, her strength increased, most importantly, her smile returned. One bright morning, she woke while Elara sang, "Morning Will Come." Tears filled her eyes immediately. She recognized the melody. The room fell silent. When Ryland explained how Elara had learned the song, Maribel wept openly, not from sadness, from gratitude. For years she had feared Callum would eventually be forgotten. Instead, his music had survived. It had crossed towns, generations, and families. It had comforted strangers. It had eased suffering. It had continued doing exactly what he intended, bringing hope. Months later, after Maribel was discharged, Ryland made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He began organizing Callum's music. Every page, every note, every unfinished lyric. The project consumed evenings and weekends. Elara helped, Maribel helped, friends volunteered. Little by little, they transformed dusty notebooks into something meaningful. A year later, the local community theater hosted a memorial concert. The event celebrated unknown artists whose work deserved to be heard. At the center of the program stood Callum's music. The auditorium filled beyond capacity. Families, nurses, students, teachers, and former patients attended. Many knew nothing about the story. They simply came for an evening of music. As the lights dimmed, Ryland stood backstage. His hands trembled, not from fear, from emotion. The first piece performed was "Morning Will Come." The melody drifted through the theater exactly as it had drifted through the hospital corridor months earlier. People closed their eyes, some smiled, some cried, others simply listened. For those few minutes, it felt as though every broken heart in the room breathed together, and somewhere within the music, Callum's spirit seemed present, not as a ghost, not as a miracle, but as proof that love leaves traces behind. The concert ended with a standing ovation. Ryland looked toward his mother seated in the front row, healthy, smiling, alive. Beside her sat Elara, the nurse who had unknowingly carried his brother's gift across more than a decade, the nurse whose kindness had changed countless lives, the nurse whose friendship had helped heal his OWN. As the audience applauded, Ryland finally understood something grief had hidden from him for years. The people we lose never disappear completely, parts of them survive in songs. In kindness. In memories. In the lives they touch. And sometimes those pieces find their way back to us when we need them most. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to comment where you're watching from and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that hope can survive even the darkest seasons. Special request: comment "Morning Will Come" if you believe love and kindness never truly die. Years after the concert, recordings of Callum's music continued spreading through communities, hospitals, and care centers. Patients listened during treatments, families played the songs during difficult days. The melody that began as a teenage boy's gift to his struggling mother became a source of comfort for thousands, and every time Ryland heard those familiar notes, he no longer felt only loss, that he felt gratitude, because a song written by a young man gone too soon had accomplished something extraordinary. It had connected strangers, healed wounds, restored hope, and reminded everyone who heard it that even after heartbreak, morning still comes, and that may be the greatest gift any of us can leave behind.